Okay, so this is the fun part. We have a question ready to go. Somebody did put in the chat, stone in the shoe, right? Going with that theme of not liking shoes. That's not true though. I like shoes, right? So I have had a thousand thoughts of where to go today and what to talk about. And I'm not going to lie, I don't think I've actually pinned it down. And so
You
there's
know
a
what?
part of me that's like, we can jump straight into the question.
And we've
Uh,
got some questions from last time we met, you and I were
do you already
together.
have some ready to go?
I have a couple, three of them. So you want to just do Q&A today?
Let's hit it. I mean,
All right.
I'm always up for doing, I mean, I'm sure I'll jump in the middle and do teaching
Yeah.
pieces, but
Yeah. Okay.
let's hit the questions from last time first.
Okay. So put your questions in the Q&A. I'm going to hit the questions that we've been holding
Or
up for a couple weeks here, or yes.
here's another idea. If somebody, okay, so if you have a question, but it's like, hey, can you review this concept or this principle, right? Throw it out there and I'll jump into reviewing a concept or principle. I'll do more of a teaching piece. It doesn't even have to be a question. If it's something you want me to review, obviously most of the time we learn because of a good question. So if you have something, throw it in, but yeah, let's go with the questions you've already got ready.
Okay. So this is from a couple weeks ago. I am very close to my husband's arousal template. His porn addiction focused on exaggerated version of what he likes about my body. In his recovery, 1 year in, he gets an erection, which he calls good natural attraction when thinking about me or when close to me. But how can we figure out if it is truly attraction to me or just substituting thoughts of me for fantasy thoughts he had during active addiction, including thoughts of me, in order to get his fix? I'm still not comfortable with physical. This is just an FYI tacked on. I am still not comfortable with physical intimacy. So we've not been close. I assume that's physically intimate. In the last year of his recovery, he gets an erection with simple things like running his fingers through my hair or a hand on my shoulder. And then follow up, what if he isn't being open about his state of arousal? He's hiding it and trying to insist that he just wants support me by putting a hand on my shoulder in moments when I need support. So this is a betrayed partner who's worried about, being objectified and kind of turned into part of the addiction.
Okay, so not having this question in front of me, I am going to try and remember all of it. If I remember right, I think I commented on the first part. I'm going to go ahead and do it again, but maybe I never did.
I don't think we got to it.
We didn't get to it at all?
I don't think we got to it at all.
Okay, so then let me just try and go through all of it. When I'm working with somebody who struggles with sexual compulsivity, it is a betrayed partner who will almost always say, what happens if basically they're using me for acting out. And though that is possible, it's typically not as likely because the thing that I get nervous about when working with somebody with the compulsivity, and I've told people this, that sometimes, sorry, let me slow down because my brain's like, bah, 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 bah. It's are they present during the experience, right? Are they present during the sexual experience? Because if they're in fantasy land and they're acting out a fantasy in their head and they are not they're not present in the sexual experience, right? Then we have a potential issue going on there, because then they could be objectifying you, right? And so there are times, here's one tool, this is not the solution, but one tool is I've said, hey, keep your eyes open during sex. It's way harder to fantasize when your eyes are open. It's way harder to fantasize if there's some communication going on between the two of you, because that's keeping you present. If you close your eyes and you're into the experience, which is fine, it is way easier to escape into some sort of fantasy or mental thought process and not be present. And then your partner could just be an object to act out on. Does that make sense? So here's the hard part. As a betrayed partner, what I'm going to want to do is ask him, in this case, how often are you fantasizing when we're engaging? Now, it sounds like you haven't had sex for a year. And so you're going to have to ask questions. Do you remember when we would have sex? How often you would be escaping into fantasy? Do you remember how often you were disconnected from the experience? And if they can even recollect, right? But that's the risk that a betrayed partner has to take at some point, is to re-engage sexually and say, I'm going to take a vulnerable risk that you can stay present. We're going to talk about it beforehand. Tell me what it looks like when you're not present. Tell me what it looks like when you are present. Does closing your eyes help to take you out of the experience, or are you still able to stay in? I worked with some people that during a sexual experience with their spouse, they can't escape into fantasy. In fact, that's why a lot of them, when they're acting out in their addiction, it is not uncommon for a spouse to come and say, and essentially proposition for sex, and they to be turned down. And then a half hour later, the spouse catches them looking at porn. And it's like, are you kidding me? I just propositioned you for sex and you're choosing that over me. Well, the reason is because a sexual experience with their spouse is not acting out. So it doesn't give them the fix, because it's not about sex, if that makes sense. It's not about the act of sex per se, it's about the mindset. And so as a betrayed partner, it's really easy to think that because we're engaging in sex, I might be being objectified and it may not be about us at all. Well, you want to try to explore that with your partner, because every single person has a different experience. So I would ask some of those questions. Now, moving beyond that, let's say you take the risk and you engage in sexual experience, right? I would encourage you to figure out what that would look like, because a sexless marriage, over time especially, tends to not be as fulfilling as a marriage where sex is an active experience. And just so we're aware, sexless is considered 13 times or less within a 12-month period. That is considered a sexless marriage. So at some point, you have to take a risk as a betrayed partner, I would imagine even for your own fulfillment, to engage sexually. So when you start taking that risk, I would have lots of conversations beforehand about what you need to feel like they're connected, what you're hoping for in the experience. And then you've got to try it and look for signs and ask. Well, it's not the sexiest thing in the world to be hyper vigilant during sex, going, are they connected? Are they connected? Are they into me? Are they thinking about something else, right? The biggest thing to decrease pleasure during sex is fear and anxiety, right? And so there's a lot of sexual dysfunction is fear and anxiety related. So I would go into those sexual experiences understanding that, hey, all the fear and anxiety I have, this is just an experience on me working through the fear and anxiety. It may not even be a pleasurable experience, because I need to face my fear and my anxiety, and I need to be vulnerable and work with my partner on exploring that. Now, so what I come back to is, if your partner is propositioning you for sex, or even if you proposition your partner for sex, there is a vulnerability in that experience that is a higher order of connection than acting out, looking at porn, seeing a prostitute, going to a massage parlor. So just the act of seeking it out from each other puts you at a much higher level of vulnerability and realistic connection than acting out. So you have this fear, what if I'm just an objectified individual, which is a legitimate fear, but the fact that you guys are engaging is way far and above a healthy possibility than it would be if they were using their addiction in some unhealthy way. So keep in mind that just the act of you, and in this case him, propositioning each other is a really good, healthy sign. Is it perfect? Is it going to promise that there's no possibility of hurt or disconnection? Of course not. It's vulnerable, so there's always risk. And I feel like there's more to the question. And Scott, you're going to have to help me out on this. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, the second half of this is, it's not even about the sex part of it. It's just physical touch. He's getting turned on just by physical touch, but sometimes he just wants, or says he just wants to show support to his wife, but she's worried he's getting his fix. Just, oh, I just want to put a hand on your shoulder to support you because I know you're having a tough day, and she's worried he's getting a little charge out of that.
Okay, so now we're going to get into something more complex that well, I'll just jump into it. My current understanding is this. So I'm totally open to continuing to learn about this because I love the topic, but I will tell you that, like anything else, you're limited to my current understanding. So there is a concept referred to as arousal non-concordance. And arousal non-concordance, that was introduced to me by Emily Nagoski. Have we talked about this already?
No, but I know about it, but we haven't talked about it.
So arousal non-concordance is essentially, if I understand it correctly, you have an emotional arousal and a physical arousal that occurs. And so if you imagine like two circles, right? Where do those overlap? Well, for a male, if we understand the research, it's a 50% overlap. So 50% of the time, a man might have an emotional arousal, but not have a physical arousal. 50% of the time, I guess it wouldn't break up that way. It'd probably
third
be
and
like
third and a third, but yeah.
50, 25, 20, whatever. So 25% of the time, if you will, there is a physical arousal response that doesn't match an emotional arousal response. And so I think I've joked about this before. You're a teenage boy, for instance, and you're in math class and the teacher says, hey, come on up to the board and do this math problem. And you're sitting there going, I have an erection. This is so embarrassing, right? There's nothing arousing for most people about math. We're not going to shame those of you who have math on your arousal template, but I'm sorry, that was me trying to be funny.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm a math geek though, but it doesn't arouse me, but I am.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. If it's on your arousal template, I'd be really curious how that started for you. But ultimately, we have these physiological responses that occur, but just because we're having an arousal response doesn't mean we're getting our fix. You can have an arousal response physically, but not be having an emotional arousal response, and they just don't match up, So with a female, it's not, they're only 10% of the time does the physical and emotional arousal response match, right? And so it's just curiously how our bodies work. And so him having an arousal response, what I would do is ask that question. Like, hey, are you just being supportive? What about being supportive do you think is causing a physical arousal response? Is there an emotional arousal response as well? It might be that he hasn't learned to desexualize basic touch, right? The joke that has been around forever. I sent this to my wife. It's set up to be an old picture of, like, in the 50s, a woman doing a little girl's braiding her hair, right? And she says, Mommy, did you want a boy or a girl? And Mommy says, I wanted a back rub, right? Like, and so what we have to, which, I mean, it's really funny, right? But like, the reality of it is that my judgment, okay, sorry, men, but my judgment is men don't have as much of an ability to separate physical arousal from physical touch. And so there's a lot of men that physical touch means sex. I can't tell you, I'm such a hugger. I can't tell you how many men have told me, you hug too long. And I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, dude, I'm not gay. And I'm like, as far as I'm aware, gay looks really different than you and I hugging, right? Like, so they have a hard time separating, like, hey, this feels good physically, but it makes me uncomfortable. Maybe it doesn't feel good physically, but it makes me uncomfortable. And so physical touch equals gay. Like, okay, but we're not gay if we slap each other's butts on the football field. Like, gay doesn't count when we're in a sports environment. Like, this is the unfortunate part of male culture, because physical touch is often over sexualized. So what might be happening in the case of your husband is he's putting his hand on your shoulder, he's playing with your hair, and he is still learning that physical touch doesn't mean sexual arousal. It could, but that would create a lot of problem. I touch a lot of people. That sounds really awkward. I touch people on a regular basis. Lots of people ask me for hugs, right? And the truth is, there's no physical or sexual arousal at all, right? And nor for them as well. We have to learn that physical touch doesn't necessarily mean sexual. So that might be what's happening for your husband there. But I would try and explore that. He needs to maybe learn to separate it. I've worked with a lot of my couples and said, spend time where we know that a back massage is not going to turn into sex, right? I've had a lot of women tell me, man, I'd love a back massage, but I'll never ask for one. It always turns to sex. And I'm like, well, what would happen if you said, hey, I want a massage, no sex? It's like, well, then it just sounds like I'm rejecting, and he gets all hurt or whatever. And it's like, okay, but let's start talking about it. How do we desexualize normal experiences? Can we hop in the shower together and not have sex? Can we just talk and clean and have a moment to hang out while we're naked showering and not be sexual? Like, well, that sounds normal and healthy. So anyway, I don't know if I went off on too much of a tangent, but what else am
No, I don't think so. And the other thing I wanted to mention about non-concordant arousal is women tend to be much more concordant with their arousal. If they're physically aroused, they're probably emotionally aroused, and vice versa. Whereas men can be one without the other, or both, or yeah, men are really all over the place with it. So I see a hand up. Pop your question into the chat feature. We don't do the hand raising thing in the webinars, but and I'm going to throw a question out to the group. So please respond to me in the chat feature or email me, scott@seekingintegrity.com. One of the things we're working on at Seeking Integrity, Dr. Foss and I are working on it, taking longer than we would like, but we want to do either 1 or 2 new online work groups about intimacy, focusing on the emotional intimacy, and another one, or combined with emotional intimacy, on physical intimacy, sexual intimacy. So here are my questions. Should we combine those two into one work group, or should they be separate work groups? And then number 2, should they be for addicts? Should they be for betrayed partners? Should they be for couples? Or should they be for everybody together? Should they be for those groups separately? We'd love some feedback. So just throw responses into the chat feature or email me, scott@seekingintegrity.com. Okay, let's jump back to our question, shall we?
Sure.
Enough of a sales pitch from me.
You're just asking for help. I didn't hear any
I am.
at all.
I really am. Tell me what to do.
Help us.
Tell me what you want. I skipped this one. My husband won't cry and looks at me like there is something wrong with me because his mother says people who cry have emotional problems. I, however, am a crier. I know what he was taught was wrong, but how do I convince him? That's an interesting question.
Okay, so we're totally done with the last question, right?
I think we covered it.
Okay, so the next question is, I cry. My husband tells me people who cry have emotional problems.
Because he learned that from his mother.
Uh-huh. And then what was the question? How do
I know what he was taught was wrong, but how do I convince him? How do I convince him that crying is okay?
That is actually, I love that question. How do I convince you? When you figure it out, let me know. Let me throw out a couple of ideas, because why I say that when you figure it out, let me know, is because one of the things that I've learned is that learning how to teach somebody anything is terribly difficult. And so I would suggest having conversations with him about it outside of intense moments. So I would say, even if you said, hey, I watched Matt's webinar today and he addressed my question, and and I might ask him a question like, has there ever been a time in your life where somebody has cried and it hasn't made you uncomfortable? When you watch people cry in movies, does that make you uncomfortable? Are there times for you that are appropriate for crying and other times that aren't? And what you're trying to do here is just understand his particular makeup. Like, how does he view the world? That's what you're going for. You're not even trying to change it. You're trying to almost just look at what it is. What is the framework you're even working here, if that makes sense? So I would try to just get curious about what in the world that is. When a man is crying after winning the Super Bowl, for instance, do you think he has emotional problems? Like, I would try and take as many contexts as possible and figure out, when is it emotional and when's it not? Because it wouldn't surprise me, I don't know the truth, but it wouldn't surprise me if he says it's only when people close to me cry. Okay, so only people who are close to you have emotional problems when they cry. Everybody else who cries is fine, no emotional problems, right? And my guess is, as you start to ask questions and reframe some of that, he'll start to go, that's interesting. I never realized that, right? Like, so you're just trying to explore what the framework is for that. The other thing you have to learn to do, and I would probably say this, hey, sometimes I'm going to cry and I'm going to be okay with it while you learn to practice getting comfortable with it over time. Like, it's not like I'm going to come and say, hey, it's cry time so you can get comfortable. No, I'm going to learn to be comfortable with the fact that we have engagement and we are going to cry, if that makes sense. I'm going to cry just because this is what normally happens. And unfortunately, I know you're going to feel uncomfortable, and oh well, I'm going to let you learn emotional tolerance, if that makes any sense. So get some confidence, if you can, in your ability to cry, and let him learn.
Yeah. And I just want to point out that, Matt, I'm sure you do group therapy, and I do online work groups. And, my work groups are all men. I only work with men. And I only work with addicts, but that's just me. But, you know, once in a while in a work group, somebody will share something and they start crying. And I could, and either they are super uncomfortable or the other guys in the group are super uncomfortable, or some of the other guys, some people are okay with it, some people aren't. And we pause and we talk about it. And usually this happens in like level 1. And by the time you get to level 3, which there are 3 levels of our sex addiction work group, the guys are just crying away. It's great. And they're kind of like, they're still a little embarrassed sometimes, but they're like, okay, I'm getting it out, or he's getting it out. And the guys who are seeing the other guy cry will say things like, thank you for showing that emotion and letting me know it's okay. Which is a huge leap forward for some of these guys. I mean, some of these guys are like, you cry, you're a, what? And nobody wants to be that, right? And I'm sure you see the same thing in groups.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
So yes, being around other people where they can learn that crying is actually a vulnerable experience, it can be very, very helpful for modeling. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next one here. I'm the betrayed partner. This is the last one left over. It's a good thing we just did a Q&A today. My husband and I see our own CSATs, and he says he hasn't acted out since D-Day a year ago. I thought we would be farther along as a couple by now. We haven't had disclosure yet, and he drags his feet on that and does little to nothing else. Do you think adding couples counseling would help us in any way at this point? Maybe he will rethink his own recovery direction, ? I'm doubtful. Neither of us are getting our needs met right now at all.
Wow. So here's the hard part. If I were in a situation like that, gosh, I'm trying to think. So to answer the basic question, would couples counseling be helpful? With a good couples therapist, they're going to be able to, usually they'll be willing to give it a shot and see if it could be helpful. See if we can break something up and open something up. And sometimes I've been able to do that, open it up, and then I'll say, hey, this is really great that this is coming up here in this couples session. Some of this, it sounds like you need to process with your individual therapist, and then I'll send him back to his individual therapist, right? So I found that sometimes that can be very helpful. Sometimes it's like, oh, this is fantastic. Let's do this. Let's keep working with this as a couple. Sometimes it falls flat on its face and it's like, wow, even that's not working, right? And so, but it's tough because yes, when interventions aren't working, I'm all for, usually, obviously depending on the intervention, trying something new, because we need to mix it up a little. We're obviously stuck somewhere, so let's try it a little bit different. So yes, I would say that could be a viable option. And I don't see why I wouldn't give it a shot. And then I'd follow the direction of the couples counselor, because we might need to do it, open some things up, and take couples counseling a little bit slow as it gets processed with their individual therapist. Is anything on that question I missed?
No, I don't think so. I think you covered it well. I mean, at this point, you're a year in. If you feel like you're not making progress, yeah, try something new.
Yeah, like
Go to the couples
that's
counselor.
what I was hearing. I'm like, gosh, you're a year in, right? If
Yeah,
somebody had told me like we're 2 months in, we're 6 months in, I mean, even 6 months in, it's like
right.
really
I
not
mean,
seeing any progress.
yeah,
I'd want to switch something up.
yeah. And
But
get that disclosure done, and it maybe a couples counselor could jumpstart that process, because that needs to happen.
oh yeah, if I were a betrayed partner sitting for a year, that is the thing. As when I'm working with a betrayed partner as their therapist, it is so frustrating. Like when they're waiting for disclosure and it's taking forever, and I'm like, I get it, you need this to heal. At the same time, he's got to be ready, otherwise you're not going to get what you need. And so it's I hate that trapped feeling in that moment.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. This is we're on to today's questions. Yeah. And I love this question. This is from the betraying partner, the perpetrating spouse, who's a porn addict with all the lies and deceit secrets that comes with that. He acknowledges that up front. So yay. My wife has asked for divorce again. What is the attachment bid with my wife when she states that I am the one who is choosing divorce and that she is not choosing this? It's because I broke our marriage vows, so I am choosing this divorce for her, basically.
Interesting.
She's asking for the divorce, but she's saying he's the one who's really pushing for divorce because he cheated.
Oh, here you're probably not going to like this. The attachment bid it's, if I'm reading this right, is her saying, can you take the blame away from me? It's too painful for me to choose the divorce. I need you to choose I need you to know that I'm choosing the divorce because you basically chose that by acting out. And so my judgment here, and I don't know if it's right, would be that she's actually asking you, maybe even, can you divorce me so that I don't have to hold that burden? Am I getting that right, Scott?
Well, I think, yeah, I think so. And I think that is certainly one of the possibilities.
Yeah. So realize that attachment bids, I mean, until we lean in with the person and figure out what it is, but if so I've seen people, the attachment bid and asking for a divorce is not actually that they even want a divorce. It's, right, I'm trying to tell you, I'm so scared that divorce feels like the only option. And so when they're saying, I want a divorce, they're saying, can you make changes? Because I don't want to lose this relationship. And I don't have any hope. I need you to show me that there's hope. And so
the key part of this question for me, and we tell, betrayed partners, don't ask for divorce unless you mean it,
Oh yeah.
But and the first sentence here, my wife has asked for divorce again. To me, that's an attachment bid of like, I don't want to end this, but oh my God, I hate you right now.
Right. And so then if she's asking for it again, I tell people the divorce is the D word, right? You can't use the D word in the marriage, right? Unless you are handing somebody divorce papers saying, here's the divorce papers, I'm done. Because other than that, usually using divorce again is just them telling you, I'm scared to death and I need help.
Yeah.
And so you have to learn to hear, if she was actually asking for a divorce, you would have been served papers. So then it's like, well, she's not asking for a divorce. She's asking for hope. She's asking for, you to make some changes so she can feel safe. She's asking, and I don't think it's a healthy way of going about it, but that would be, in my opinion, the attachment bid. If it's a continual ongoing thing, I hear people in my office all the time, well, I think maybe we should just get a divorce. They're not asking for a divorce. They're saying, I'm exhausted and don't know what else to do.
Right.
Help me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to suggest, if you have a couples counselor, to say, bring it up very politely in couples counseling. She sometimes uses the D word, and I know she wants something when she does that, but I don't know what. Is this a space where I can ask, what do you want from me when you do that? What can I do to help you feel better in that moment? Or, and
right.
then,
Like, you can ask your couples counselor, like, help me know how to show up for her. Like, I'm having a hard time not getting defensive. I'm having a hard time not feeling rejected. I'm having a hard time not shutting down. And you can tell her that. When I hear you talk about wanting a divorce, I feel rejected. I shut down. And I think you want me to pull you close. I think you want me to reassure you that I don't want a divorce. I don't know, right? Because I don't know the situation. But I'm having a hard time doing that. Be patient with me while I learn.
yeah. Yeah. And all of recovery is a learning process. I mean, I love that you said, Matt, be patient with me while I learn, because we all want to be well yesterday. And that's just not how this works.
And I hate to say it, your betrayed partner deserves for you to have been well yesterday, right? Like,
Yeah.
so they're in this situation where they are in pain, and you're like, yeah, I'm bleeding out of my head, and so I can't really help you, but eventually we'll get to your wounds, right? It's like, it's so painful for a betrayed partner, but yeah, telling them be patient with me might make them pull their hair out a little, but it might actually be exactly what you need to say.
Yeah. Okay. I'm reading this next question. Trying to, okay, this it's a little circular. My husband is highly narcissistic. He's the son of a mother who's narcissistic. One of the ways they communicated was to change what they say, and so that it comes out in ways that do not validate what the other person says. It's crazy making, and I did not know how to get my words validated unless I stop talking to him altogether. Any suggestions?
My suggestion in this case would be to actually point out the pattern. So it sounds like, I mean, again, it's hard because I don't have a specific scenario, but let's say I communicate something. Hey, when you came home late from work last night, I felt, I think hurt, lonely. I was, maybe a little scared, but
And
it's knowing.
what you want me to say when I hear that is, I hear you telling me that you felt really scared and lonely and hurt when I was late yesterday. Is that what you said? That's what you really want. You want me to validate that I get it.
Well,
and I understand that you felt that way, instead of getting defensive, like, well, I had to,
yeah, like, well, when are you going to ever accept that I put money on the table, whatever, like,
yeah.
And so I don't know exactly the scenario that this spouse would be invalidating, but what you want to try and do is just point out. So it sounds like when I bring up to you my concern about, you not getting home on time, it sounds like that frustrates you. So you want to point back the pattern that you see. And I would even try and be vulnerable if you can, if it would help. Say, what I was hoping for was a hug. And I would have loved to have you say that you're sorry, but I understand that you may not be capable of doing that. And that makes me sad. But I hear that it's hard for you to validate my feelings. And like, I would say that out loud. I hear that it's hard for you to validate my feelings because I'm pointing out the pattern, but you don't want to do it in like a snarky way. You don't want to do it in like you just want to talk about it as though it's just there in the room. Sorry, did that make sense? You're muted again. You're muted.
Sorry, I was chewing ice. Yeah, I mean, I think it's okay to say, I just need you to validate that you understand what I'm feeling right now. That's all I need from you. I don't need the defensiveness. I'm not mad at you. I just need you to understand how I'm feeling. Can you repeat, or whatever it is? I think it's okay to ask and just say, this is what I need.
Right. The tough part is don't get trapped in the idea that because, how do I say this? Because I told him what I needed, that he's going to do it. Right. Like, you have to realize that I'm just stating it because it's healthy for me to have a voice. Yeah. And I'm pointing out the pattern because it lessens that crazy making feeling, rather than me going, well, did I say that? Was I asking him? And like whatever crazy making that he might have put out there.
So, yeah, I mean, yeah, I have a narcissistic mother, and I can say things over and over and ask her to please hear me over and over, and she doesn't. I mean, she's truly narcissistic, and it just doesn't. I don't think she's capable.
Right.
So
and sometimes you recognize that a spouse isn't capable. I will say one piece of good news is that when I work with somebody who has sexual compulsivity, they often show narcissistic traits. But once you treat the addiction and you help them heal, a lot of those traits can go away because they're getting connection and learning for the first time, but doesn't mean it will. I've had people where I treat them and at the end I go, okay, well, you're still a narcissist, but maybe you just know how to act a little bit nicer.
Yeah.
And not unhealthy.
Yeah. I like this next question too. I told my porn addict spouse to be prepared that my mood might be bad when he gets home, and then I was willing to leave the house if he wanted the house to himself rather than me there, with a bad mood. He texted that he was tired of being the bad guy all the time and having me tell him things like that for the last 3 or 4 weeks and pooping on him, essentially. I'm rephrasing. And how bad our relationship is. He's feeling needy, vulnerable, frustrated, sexually lonely. This is 2 months from the latest discovery, but they've been together 40 years. Sex has been an issue throughout the relationship. The betrayed partner here wants to work it out, but knows there's a lot to still unpack and says, this is the real question. Should I leave for now, as in a therapeutic separation, I would assume?
Boy. So the tough part about this is that there are times when a therapeutic separation is absolutely necessary. Physical safety issues. Neither one of you can ever really have a healthy place or find a healthy time to get grounded. I'm, as an attachment therapist, so you got to understand my bias. People don't get closer by separating. There are times that if we separate, it can allow us to get more grounded and healthy ourselves. And once we're healthier, we can come back together. But the separation in and of itself doesn't do anything to bring people together. A separation gives me room to get grounded and healthy for myself. So when we come back together, we are coming back to work on the exact same problem. Separation won't fix anything about the problem. It gives me room to get healthier. And if I get healthier, I'm going to be better equipped to face the problem. Well, I've seen people separate and never take the time to actually get healthier. And they just separate because, it feels so much better. Well, that's just a pathway for divorce. And hey, if people don't stay together and get divorced, that's up to them. I'm not going to judge what's right in their circumstance. I will say that Gottman's research says 85% of people who get divorced are either more unhappy or just as unhappy as they were when they were married. So there's my judgment coming out in the place of a statistic, I guess. But I just don't think it's that I could answer that question. Should you leave for now? I don't have enough info. But even if I had enough info, it's not my choice. You've got to figure out what may be best, knowing the circumstance and what feels right in your heart. But separation doesn't solve problems. Us working on our issues is what solves problems. So if you have to separate in order to work on your issues, well, then yes, separation sounds like that makes sense. But separation and not working on your issues, or separation and working on your issues, but you didn't need to separate, may actually be detrimental and not healthy. So I love the fact that I can give you a terribly vague answer. I hope that helped.
So, again, I work with the addicts in my work group to deal with them all the time.
Can I,
and the guys,
I think this person just added a little
oh, go ahead.
thing. So at the very end, it says for the weekend then. And so if you're talking about, hey, I'm gonna take a drive and go up, here in Arizona, it's go up north, go to Sedona or something, go to Flagstaff, right? If you're gonna go take a drive for the weekend and get away, oh, sure, go away for the weekend and enjoy some self-care and go on a hike or whatever it is that you want to do. That's not separation, right? That's you going and getting some self-care that happens to be away from the home. You know what I mean? Like, that's not, yeah, do that. Even if you do that once a week, go ahead. If you're getting other times living together throughout the week, connecting with each other, trying to work through things, but you taking a couple of days, even if it's every week, if you have to, if you can afford it, whatever that looks like. Sure. I don't know that I have a huge problem with that. I think eventually, if you were doing it every week, it'd be like, all right, if you guys are working on each other, on yourselves and getting healthier, instead of going away for the weekend, what about going away for a day trip? But one of those nights where you would have gone away, what would a date night look like? Some way to try and connect a little bit more. But yeah, so I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I have a follow-up. So, like I said, I work with the addicts, I work with the guys, and they hear therapeutic separation, or they hear, I want to go away for the weekend to Sedona to clear my head. And, that's what the betrayed partner says. That's what the wife tells them. And they hear, you're leaving me, you're divorcing me, it's over, and they panic. How do you get them to understand, no, when, your couples therapist and your wife want to talk to you about a therapeutic separation, it's so you can stay together, not or when your wife wants to go away for the weekend to clear her head, it's not to see if she can survive for 2 days without you. So then she can divorce you because she knows she can live for 2 days without you. This is not what they're doing.
Yeah, I would actually try to do it with attachment language. Like I would say, hey, I know what I'm about to tell you is going to sound like I don't want to be with you. And that's not true. You're likely going to feel rejection. And even though I understand it, that's not the message I'm trying to send to you. So if you hear everything I'm saying, which I've talked about before is slicing it thinner, everything I'm saying is, I would imagine that what you're going to hear from me sounds like I don't want to be close to you, but that's not what's happening for me. And so I imagine you're going to feel rejection, but the truth is I don't want you to feel rejection. However, I'm going to make a choice that I think is best for me. I think it's best for both of us. And what I'd like to do is come back as soon as possible, or at most, this is what the separation looks like, right? And so then you set hard boundaries on what that looks like, and just try to reiterate, it's not for the intent of surviving without you. It's not for the intent of preparing for a divorce. I'm trying to get grounded and clear. Unless it is for the intent of trying to see if you can survive without him. And then in that case, tell him the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really thinking about divorce and I want to spend a few days away from you just to see what it's like.
Yeah.
And
then let him learn to sit in that fear, not trying to make him scared, but don't lie.
The truth is always better. We're scared to tell other people the truth because we're afraid we're going to hurt them. But usually, I always want the truth. I go to the doctor. I would prefer the doctor tell me the truth. I don't want him lying to me. And I think it's the same in any relationship. Tell me what I'm dealing with.
Yeah, for sure.
But I really feel for betrayed partners because during the act of addiction, you get no information about what you're dealing with unless you discover it yourself, and that is not fair. So anyway, All right, let's pop down here. I like the, oh, this is a comment to me, but I like the idea of a couple's sexual intimacy group with both partners. Somebody else has commented, several people have commented, it's been all over the place, but we'll figure it out. My husband needs to learn how to be intimate with me, and I totally agree. There
So
was there
can
was a
I jump
question in there
to-
that I wanted, but go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so let's go to, there's a follow-up, and I think this was the one about husband having
Oh,
narcissistic tendencies.
yes, yeah,
And
this
so
is the
and so the example is, I can say anything. Quote, I am going to watch Matt and Scott today on the webinar. His response will be, I'll watch it when I get home. Okay. And so I think the question was, how do I respond? My initial response is, oh, cool. Let's talk about it when you're done.
yeah, at least he's gonna watch it.
Right. Like like in my mind, it's, if he's trying to pull some power play, like you should have said right? Oh, cool. Yeah. That sounds great. I'm excited to have you watch it. Let's talk about it when it's over. Right. So then it's like, I'm basically putting it back on him.
Yeah.
And then next week, because that's when I'll be back, I'm gonna say, hey, are we gonna watch the webinar today? Are you gonna watch it after you get home? Because I'm gonna watch it live.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
I almost like, hey, like, that sounds great. Are we gonna do this? Or is it just I today?
Yeah, and it's the husband who's responding after the wife says, I'm going to watch Matt Scott today. He says, I'll watch it when I get home. He's actually probably been listening to me, because I harp on my guys all the time to stop saying I and my. It is we and our. You got to reframe your relationship as we and our and us, not I and my. I mean, guys say, oh, my kids, my house, and I just want to smack them and be like, no, you selfish jerk.
When there is a possessive involved, like our home, our kids, our relationship, I totally agree. If it's like, we feel sad today,
No,
it's like,
no.
I
Creepy.
feel sad
Creepy.
today. Yeah, like, so when there's a possessive involved, or a possession, I don't know how to say that, but like something that we both share, then yeah, if he is taking that from you, he's misunderstanding.
Yeah, so yeah, but I where I first started to notice that is on HGTV, when it was a couple going to buy a new house, and the man would always say, my money, my house, but she gets to make the decision, but it's mine. Like, no, it's ours. Anyway, that's completely semi off topic.
Down with the patriarchy, Scott.
Thank you. Here's what I wanted to ask about. This was in the suggestion on how to handle the work groups, but it says we have suffered anorexia. We have both suffered sexual anorexia. This is a husband and wife. What is sexual anorexia? Do you use that term? Do you like that term? Do you not like it? How do people overcome it? Where does it come from? That's a whole hour. But
oh gosh, yes it is. So let's just talk about it briefly. I use the term. It's like any other term. It describes something, and I will use it until I find something better. I don't see anything inherently shameful about the term, so I use it all the time. I mean, sexual anorexia is just the opposite of sexual compulsivity, in the sense that it's a complete shutdown of the sexual self. Whereas sexual compulsivity is like a hyper use of the sexual self to meet needs that weren't ever meant to be met through sex, if that makes sense. So the problem is that I've seen lots of people in recovery, and it's like, well, I haven't had a slip in 2 years. And, I'll start asking them some questions, and I'm like, well, what's your sex life like? Oh yeah, we don't have sex. And I'm like, why not? I don't know. We just don't. I'm like, well, I'm nervous because they think they're really far into recovery, but really they've just potentially shut down their sexual self. Well, you can't say that you're you can't have a healthy recovery when you're living in sexual anorexia, because you're not learning to live with sex in a healthy way. So really all you've done is swung the pendulum the other way, and it looks like you're sober. And in some sense you are, but in another sense you aren't, because if you were trying to manage and control your emotions through sexual behavior, through the compulsivity, now you're controlling and managing your sexual behaviors through anorexia. And so you're really in a similar place where all you're doing is managing the emotions that you don't know how to manage just by restricting sex instead of overusing it.
Yeah, I see it as two sides of the same coin. Either way, I feel a lot of shame around me in general, and maybe around my sexual desires in general. And as a sex addict, I am also convinced that other people will never meet my needs. Childhood trauma, all that stuff. The underlying issues are there. So I avoid trying to get my emotional intimacy need met by skipping the emotional part of sex. And that's why I become a sex addict. I objectify. You are not another person if, basically, you can't hurt me because you're not real. That's sex addiction. And it gets me out of my head, particularly pornography. You can go for hours and hours and hours at a time, completely out of your head, just like you're drunk or high or whatever. Sexual anorexia, I'm still avoiding the pain of trying to get my needs met. I still have this desperate desire for emotional intimacy with you, and I would love for it to escalate into sexual intimacy, but I'm so afraid of you, and that's the collective everyone on earth, you,
right,
that you can hurt me and will hurt me, because that's what I learned as a child. So I become sexually anorexic. I'm not escaping, so technically I'm sober, like Matt said, but I'm not having a healthy integrated life either,
right.
and I'm still not getting my needs as a human being met.
Well,
and that's the sad part.
A betrayed partner typically picks up on that in such a beautiful way, but they get so mixed up in their head because the sexually compulsive partner will say, well, but I'm sober. I haven't acted out for 2 years. I haven't acted out for 5 years. And it's like, but the betrayed partner's sitting there going, yeah, but our life isn't normal. Like, we don't have healthy sex. And I proposition and you turn me down. You may not be acting out, but you aren't acting in the marriage. And so the betrayed partner knows there's a problem, but they feel crazy in their own head because the verbiage is there. Well, I'm sober. And it's like, I've got to be careful, because if I'm working with them individually, I will confront them. No, you're not. But I don't know that I would say a betrayed partner should confront them the same way. As a therapist, I have that ability, right? But to say to them, sure, you're sober, you haven't acted out in a sexually compulsive way, but what if you're not sober because you aren't learning how to engage sexually in a healthy way, right? And so true recovery is reintegration of healthy sex into a marriage. Or
the analogy we use a lot of times for sex addiction is eating disorders, where I'm a binge eater, I'm 400 pounds, and I have an eating disorder, so I go in for treatment, and the goal is not to stop eating. If I stop eating, I will literally die. Right. The goal is to develop a healthy relationship with food, and I still get to have ice cream once in a while. I just get a scoop, not the whole gallon. But a lot of people, when they get into that kind of recovery, they swing toward anorexia, and they're like, well, I'm going to eat 400 calories a day. I'm going to peel my grapes because there's 2 calories in the peel, and that's equally unhealthy. As a matter of fact, it's more unhealthy, I think. And sex addiction and sexual anorexia, it's kind of the same thing. It's just sometimes we swing too far and we never address our underlying issues. And both of these disorders, until we address our underlying issues, we're always going to struggle in some way with something.
Yep. Otherwise, you're just going to hop from one addiction or one compulsivity or one problem to another.
Yeah.
So absolutely. Hopefully that helps you guys for today. Scott,
Yes.
as usual, I guess I'll see you next week.
You'll see me next week, and we'll see all of you next week. And happy Memorial Day to everyone in advance. Matt, have a great weekend. Everyone else have a great weekend.
All right. See you guys.
Cheers.